All right. We got the idea to read some very profitable material from old days, in days of old when knights were bold. And the first reading I'd like to do is for our mutual American edification concerning the kingly office of Christ from a public lecture that was given by A. Hodge, pictured here, and compiled in a book called Evangelical Theology. He lived from 1823 to 1886, and he was a professor of systematic theology at Princeton. And he was the son of Charles Hodge, famous systematic theologian. Now he's speaking to the general public here. So this is the level at which common people were able to communicate and be communicated with. There's nothing highfalutin about it at that time. But we'll see. It's not so easy to hear some of this stunted English as we might think of it, but it's really very beautiful. He begins, I'm reading arbitrarily actually, somewhat. It's page 235 in a section where he speaks about the kingly office of Jesus Christ. And he says of Christ's kingdom of glory, during the present age, Christ is set forth principally as a conquering captain, reigning at the head of his militant host, the captain of our salvation, and the conqueror of his and our enemies, and the subduer of the world. But hereafter the scriptures reveal a final consummation, when Christ's kingdom shall be complete in all its members, and shall be developed to its perfect state, when all the redeemed shall be gathered, the crisis of judgment past, the glorified bodies of the saints reunited to their perfected spirits. Then shall the Son of Man sit in the throne of glory, his glory, and there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. Okay? He goes on. But if Christ's mediatorial kingdom is, as asserted, absolutely universal, especially if his direct authority embraces, without exception, every human being on the face of the earth during all ages, in all their relations and in all their actions, then the question necessarily arises, if Christ's kingdom embraces every human relation, how can there be any distinction between church and state, between the things that belong unto Caesar and the things that belong unto Messiah? This is a question which, however simple in itself, has continued to puzzle the minds of men from the beginning of the church, and this confusion of thought has necessarily introduced confusion and conflict of action. Among the Jews, the state and the church were one identical organism, discharging both secular and ecclesiastical functions, in part through the same officers, and in part and at times through distinct officers. I would take exception to what he says here. Not that I'll do it at each point I take exception, but there was a clear distinction between the religious approach to God, which had to be by the Levitical system, those of the tribe of Levi, and also descendants of Aaron. The priests had specific duties, and yes, there was some secular judging that they made, but not necessarily in that way. It could have been that there were judges, but Samuel was a priest, so it doesn't establish that the circuit judges weren't priests. But the point is, they're not just the officers that were without distinction. There was distinction, and you know very well that those who ignored the distinction of civil officers encroaching upon the ecclesiastical sometimes suffered leprosy, or they could have suffered death. Now, the answer given by the papists about this distinction, while admitting the distinction touching church and state, is that as Christ is King of all men, and his authority is supreme in every sphere of human interest and action, the Pope, his vicar, reigns in his name supreme over all earthly sovereigns, and that the Catholic Church, an external organized body, is in every land supreme over the state being, in truth, only a subordinate and changeable organ of the Church for the purpose of executing the functions of temporal government. The answer of the Erastians of the state-church systems makes the state supreme over the Church, and the Church is practically regarded only as an organ of the state for the purpose of effecting the functions of religious institutions and worship. But the true principle has, in this last age, become generally recognized, that state and church, considered as organized societies with laws and officers, have entirely distinct spheres, methods, and objects, and hence that they have no specific organic relation to one another whatever. They indeed embrace the same territory and the same personal constituents, the same men and women who in one relation constitute the state, in another relation constitute the church. The state deals with the persons and property of church members and with the public property of ecclesiastical societies, precisely as it deals with that of all other persons and voluntary societies, and the members of the church and ecclesiastical societies owe precisely the same obedience to the state that is owed by all other citizens and associations. All this is perfectly clear and true. But inferences have been drawn from these principles which absolutely divorce the state from all religion and emancipate it entirely from the mediatorial authority of Jesus Christ. It is absurdly argued that if the state is absolutely free from any entangling alliance with the church, it must be free from all religious qualities and obligations. In other words, if there's no church association, then God may have nothing to do with the state. That is, if it is free from the authority of the church as an organized society, it must be free from the authority of Jesus Christ, the head of the church, and of the Bible, which contains his code of laws. It is argued that as no man has any right to impose his own religious convictions on others, so no body of men can possess any such right, and therefore that no majority of citizens has the right to impose by state legislation upon a recalcitrant minority obligations having a religious origin. So, because I can't tell another individual what to do, no gathering of individuals can tell other individuals what they're bound to if it has a religious character in that command. These inferences, however, unwarrantable and preposterous, are exceedingly prevalent and are admitted, if not proclaimed, by many true Christians who are unconscious of their absurdity and utter disloyalty to the Lord that bought them and whom they profess to serve as their king. He doesn't like that. It is very evident that it does not follow, because the organized bodies we call churches have no organic connection with the state, nor any right to pronounce judgment upon things purely within the jurisdiction of the state, that therefore the state has nothing to do with religious laws or obligations. There are three positions here of infinite importance to the Christian citizens of the United States. First, as a matter of fact, every state in the world must have and has had a religion of some kind. The state is an association of human beings for the purpose of promoting and protecting the interests of society within the limits of secular life. The state is the people themselves acting in their organic capacity through the machinery of law, It is self-evident, therefore, that the state or collective body must have all the qualities which belong to its constituent members. A house is a great deal more than the wood or brick or stone or iron of which it is built. Nevertheless, every house has the quality of its material, whether wood or brick or stone or iron, and will necessarily act under given circumstances as determined severally by the nature of its materials. So just as a house is made up of materials, so a state is made up of individuals and groups, and you can't get away from that connection. So every state is vastly more than the persons of whom it is composed. Nevertheless, the character of the state must in every respect be determined by the character of the people who constitute it. If the people are rational, the state will be rational. If moral, then moral. If rich or energetic, then it will possess those qualities. And nonetheless, if the people be religious, will the state they compose be religious? It means not any less than those other things. If they're religious, the state will be religious. It is simply absurd that a man can be thoroughly convinced that God exists and that he is a moral governor who will demand an account for all the deeds done in the body, that he can have his heart full of loyal affection and devotion to God as an individual, while engaged in private business, and then be perfectly oblivious to the existence and of the claims of God as soon as he begins to act politically as a citizen of the state. If a man knows that God has forbidden theft or incest or divorce, except on certain conditions, or the pursuit of worldly business on the weekly Sabbath, he cannot, as a citizen, do otherwise than make and execute laws in conformity to the known will of God. If a state in its public law acts atheistically, it can only be because a majority of its citizens are in heart atheists, no matter what religious professions they may make. Now here he's dealing as if the majority is the settled form or the portion, but it could be the most influential people are atheists or the most authoritative people. So it's not just, as he stated, a majority. But let's say that's the way all matters are settled by majority vote. Well, then it would be by majority. Middle ground, a negative position, that there would be no effect on the state, is absolutely impossible. God is either recognized or denied. He is either carefully obeyed or rebelliously disobeyed. And this impossibility of a negative position is just as true in political societies and in their conduct as in any other department of human life. Every nation has a religion or is positively, aggressively atheistic. Indifference is antagonism. That is, indifference to the question of God and his will is to be antagonistic to God and his will. Second, every Christian must believe that the state ought to be obedient to the revealed law of Christ. Now, what do American Christians think about this? Do you believe, all American Christians, that every state ought to be obedient to the revealed will of Christ? Well, he says it is the case. This is so because, one, the Word of God explicitly declares that the powers that be are ordained of God, and that rulers are ministers of God to us for good, that whoever resists the power resists the ordinance of God. So God has created the order and established the order of which the powers of the state are part. Because Christ himself explicitly declared that to him as mediator, all power, that is the right of dominion, in heaven and on earth, all power in heaven and on earth had been committed to him. He is the mediator, all power of all powerful. Let me read that sentence again. Because Christ himself explicitly declared that to him as mediator, all power in heaven and on earth had been committed. He is thus made Lord of lords and King of kings, extending to the political realm. 3. Because the Christian revelation expressed in the inspired scriptures expresses the will of Christ upon many subjects in which it can be carried out only through the agency of the state and of her laws and officers. The state must pronounce her will as to the rest of the Sabbath day, as to marriage and divorce, as to the rights of property and the relations of capital and labor, as to capital punishment, and as to the education of the young. The ground covered by these subjects the state cannot possibly avoid, and it is equally impossible for a Christian man who knows the will of Christ as to the points in question to ignore or disobey that will when acting in the capacity of a citizen of the state. If he does do so, he is consciously guilty of direct disloyalty to his Lord. All intelligent and honest Christians must seek to bring all the action of the political society to which they belong obedient to the revealed will of Christ, the supreme King, the ruler among the nations. The church and the state are mutually, entirely independent. The officers and the laws of the one have no jurisdiction within the sphere of the other. Nevertheless, Christ is the common king of each, and his Bible is the common statute book of each. The only difference is that under the one and selfsame king, Christ, the light of nature is the primary, and the word of Scripture the supplementary law of the state, while the word of revelation is the primary, and the light of nature the supplementary law of the church. So for the state, it's first the light of nature, and nature's God, and then the Scripture supplementary. And then in the other case, the church, it is the revelation in Scriptures that's primary, and the light of nature supplementary. But Christ and conscience and the Bible rule equally in each sphere. Third, these United States of North America are, and from the beginning were, of law, of right, and of actual fact, a Christian nation. The original colonies were settled by bodies of men of conspicuous Christian character who emigrated from their European homes for religious reasons. They were Puritans, Huguenots, Scotch-Irish, Dutch and German Presbyterians, Quakers, Episcopalians, and Roman Catholics, but all alike Christians. Beyond any other equally various and numerous set of men known in human history, they were earnest Christians, and they came here for the very purpose of crystallizing their faith in imperishable institutions. These men subdued the wilderness, founded the nation, and laid all the foundation stones of our constitutional law. The common law of England, which also is the creature of Christianity, is the common law of 9/10 of our states and territories. Christian denominations, Episcopal or independent, were established by law in almost all the early colonies. Theism is recognized explicitly in almost all our state constitutions, and Christianity in many of them. Christianity has been recognized from the first by explicit action in the appointment of chaplains for Congress and for the Army and Navy of the United States and for the legislatures and prisons of the several states, by the appointment of fast days and of Thanksgiving days, by the supreme magistrates of the several states and of the nation, and by the enactment of the Sabbath laws and of the laws for the suppression of blasphemy. What was true at the first has been becoming more and more true to the actual fact ever since. Nearly 1/2 of all the actual adult population of the country are communicants in the Christian churches. The ratio of the communicants in our evangelical churches to the whole population was in 1800 as 1 to every 14 and a half of all ages. In 1850, it was as 1 to every 6 and a half. In 1870, as 1 in every 5 3/4. And in 1880, 1 to every 5 of the total inhabitants. That is professing Christians, membership in Christian churches. While in the meantime, between 6 and 7 millions of our Roman Catholic fellow Christians have come into existence. That is here in America. From 1800 to 1880, the whole population of the nation has increased almost tenfold, while in the same time, the communicants of our evangelical churches have increased almost 28-fold. There are not two laws for individuals and for communities. The obligations which bind individuals necessarily bind all the communities which these individuals constitute. Every human being is bound to be Christian. Therefore, every community of human beings is bound to obey the law of Christ. The United States, as a matter of historic fact, have always professed to be a Christian state, and we are therefore doubly bound to this allegiance. 1, by virtue of the common obligation which binds all men. 2, by virtue of the special opportunities and covenants of our ancestors which descend upon us by natural inheritance. You see how important it is to screen people who are coming here to see that they recognize that they're entering into an inheritance and an obligation of Christian faith and action and law. Now, Roman numeral 5, the overwhelming importance of this principle and weight of this obligation appear in the clearest light the moment the nation claims to regulate the supreme function of education. And this is really what I wanted to get to, his section on education. It is insisted upon that the right of self-preservation is the highest law of states as well as of individuals. That if the suffrage, the right to vote, is universal, all holders of that suffrage must be educated in order to secure the safety of the state. That in consequence of the heterogeneous character of our population and the divisions of the Christian church, there is no agency in existence competent to educate the whole body of the holders of the universal suffrage or the right to vote, except the state itself. Only the state stands as equipped to educate all the people. That's what he's alleging here. The situation, therefore, stands thus. First, the tendency of the entire system, in which already vast progress has been made, is to centralization. Each state governs her own system of common schools by a central agency, which brings them, for the sake of greater efficiency, into uniformity of method and rules. These schools are graded and supplemented by normal schools, high schools, and crowned by the state university. The tendency is to unite all these school systems of the several states in one uniform national system. This is the tendency, providing with all the abundant resources of the nation for the entire education of its citizens in every department of human knowledge, and in doing this to establish a uniform curriculum of study, uniform standards for the selection of teachers, and a uniform school literary apparatus of textbooks, etc. Ready? Second, the tendency is to hold that this system must be altogether secular. He's telling what was present, what was obvious to observers then. There was talk and a belief that it had to be the state that did the educating, and that it would be centralized, and that it would be secular. The atheistic doctrine is gaining currency even among professed Christians and even among some bewildered Christian ministers. that an education provided by the common government for the children of diverse religious parties should be entirely emptied of all religious character. The Protestants object to the government schools being used for the purpose of inculcating the doctrines of the Catholic Church, and Romanists object to the use of the Protestant version of the Bible and to the inculcation of the peculiar doctrines of the Protestant churches. The Jews protest against the schools being used to inculcate Christianity in any form, and the atheists and agnostics protest against any teaching that implies the existence and moral government of God. Now we have to pay careful attention. It is capable of exact demonstration that if every party in the state has the right of excluding from the public schools whatever he does not believe to be true, then he that believes most must give way to him that believes least. And then he that believes least must give way to him that believes absolutely nothing, no matter in how small a minority the atheists or the agnostics may be. It is self-evident that on this scheme, if it is consistently and persistently carried out in all parts of the country, the United States system of national education, as was then proposed, will be the most efficient and wide instrument for the propagation of atheism which the world has ever seen. To be continued.